The salt spray hit Maya's face like 1,000 tiny needles as rough hands shoved her toward the edge of the dock. The roar of motorcycle engines drowned out her scream, but nothing could silence the terror that gripped her heart as she saw the dark shadows circling in the crystal-clear water below dorsal fins slice through the waves with predatory precision. And in that suspended moment before she hit the surface, Maya Thompson's entire life flashed before her eyes. 32 years of struggle, triumph, and a dream that had brought her to this beautiful, terrible moment on the Florida Keys. The impact knocked the breath from her lungs. Cold water rushed into her mouth, her nose, filling her with the taste of salt and fear. As she thrashed toward the surface, a massive gray shape glided past, close enough that she could see the rows of teeth in its partially open mouth. This was how it would end, not in the courtroom where she'd fought for justice, not in the community center where she'd taught kids to swim, but here in these turquoise waters that had promised a new beginning. If you're watching this story unfold, you're about to witness something that will restore your faith in humanity. Hit that like button and subscribe to Acts of Depth, because what happens next proves that sometimes the most unexpected heroes emerge from the darkest moments. Maya had arrived in Marathon Key just 3 days earlier, her used Honda Civic packed with everything she owned. The law firm back in Chicago had made their position clear. Her pro bono work with immigrant families was admirable but not profitable. They needed lawyers who brought in billable hours, not bleeding hearts who worked for free. After 8 years of 16-hour days and watching wealthy clients walk free while poor families got crushed by the system, Maya had finally had enough. The inheritance from her grandmother, a woman who'd cleaned houses for 50 years to put Maya through law school, was just enough to start over somewhere new. The Sunset Marina had seemed perfect when she'd first seen it online. A small apartment above a bait shop, close enough to the water that she could hear the waves at night, far enough from tourists that she could actually afford the rent. The owner, Captain Bill, was a weathered man in his 70s who'd barely looked up from his fishing nets when she'd arrived. But his wife, Rosa, had welcomed Maya with fresh-baked banana bread and stories about the islands. They needed help with the shop's legal paperwork, Rosa explained, permits and licenses that had piled up over the years. In exchange for reduced rent, would Maya mind taking a look? It was exactly what Maya needed. Simple, honest work for people who deserved help. No more defending corporations that poison water supplies. No more watching executives in $1,000 suits explain why laying off 500 workers was financially necessary. Just small-town legal work, helping fishermen keep their boats registered and small business owners navigate bureaucracy. On her second morning, Maya had walked down to the dock with her coffee, watching the sunrise paint the water in shades of gold and pink. A pod of dolphins played in the distance, their sleek bodies arcing through the air in perfect synchronization. She'd actually smiled, really smiled, for the first time in months. Her grandmother would have loved this place, would have sat right here with her Bible and her sweet tea, talking about how God's plan sometimes took you through rough waters to get to calm seas. That's when she'd first heard the motorcycles. The sound had started as a distant rumble, growing louder until 6 Harley-Davidsons rolled into the marina parking lot. The riders wore matching leather vests with a skull and crossbones patch, Confederate flags stitched onto the shoulders. They dismounted with the casual arrogance of men who owned every space they entered, boots heavy on the wooden planks of the dock. Maya had learned long ago when to make herself invisible. Growing up on Chicago's South Side taught you to read a room, to know when trouble was looking for an excuse. She'd quietly gathered her coffee cup and turned back toward the bait shop. But one of the bikers, a massive man with a graying beard and arms covered in prison tattoos, had spotted her. "Well, well," he'd called out, his voice carrying across the water. "Looks like the neighborhood's changing, boys. They're letting anyone in these days." The others had laughed, an ugly sound that made Maya's skin crawl. She'd kept walking, shoulders straight, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her fear. But she'd felt their eyes on her back, heard their muttered comments about property values, and knowing your place. Captain Bill had been cleaning fish when she'd entered the shop, his knife moving with practiced precision. He'd glanced at her face and then out the window at the bikers, storm riders. He'd said quietly, "Local club, Been coming here for 20 years, think they own the place. He'd pause, considering his words. They're mostly talk. Mostly. The word mostly had hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken warnings. Rosa had emerged from the back room, her face creased with worry. Maybe you should stay inside today, dear. Just until they move along. But Maya had spent her entire life being told where she could and couldn't go. She'd been the only black student in her law school's constitutional law seminar, the only woman of color at her firm's partner meetings. Each time someone suggested she might be more comfortable somewhere else, she'd planted her feet and refused to move. This was no different. I'll be fine, she told them, though her hands shook slightly as she sorted through the morning's mail. They can't do anything in broad daylight. She'd been wrong about that. The next morning, Maya had forced herself back to the dock. She wouldn't let them win, not these men who thought intimidation was their birthright. The sun blazed overhead, turning the water into a mirror of light. She'd brought legal documents to review, spreading them on a weathered picnic table near the boat slips. If the storm riders wanted to play their games, she'd make them do it while she worked. For an hour, everything remained peaceful. Fishing boats chugged out to sea, their engines leaving trails of diesel smoke in the morning air. Pelicans dove for fish, their prehistoric forms graceful despite their awkward appearance. Maya actually began to relax, making notes on a commercial fishing permit that needed updating. The familiar rhythm of legal work soothed her nerves. This was her element, where words on paper could shield people from harm. Then she heard the rumble again. This time, 8 motorcycles rolled in, more than before. The leader, she'd learned his name was Tank, swung off his bike with deliberate slowness. The skull tattoo on his neck seemed to leer at her as he approached, his boots thundering on the dock's wooden planks. "Thought we made it clear yesterday," Tank said, stopping just close enough that she could smell the stale beer and cigarettes on his breath. "This ain't your kind of place." Maya kept her eyes on her documents, pen steady in her hand. "It's a public dock. I have as much right to be here as anyone." "Rights?" Tank spat the word like it tasted sour. "You people always talking about rights. What about our right to keep our town the way we like it?" The other bikers formed a semicircle behind him, cutting off her path back to the bait shop. Maya's mouth went dry, but she forced herself to look up, meeting Tank's bloodshot eyes. "I'm not bothering anyone. I'm just doing my work." "Your work?" A biker with a Confederate flag bandana laughed. "What kind of work? You some kind of social worker? Here to help the disadvantaged youth or some liberal nonsense?" The atmosphere shifted like a storm front moving in. Tank's face darkened, veins bulging in his neck. "A lawyer? Of course you are. Probably here to sue somebody, right? That's what you people do. Come in, cause trouble, try to take what honest folks worked for." Maya stood slowly, gathering her papers. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but running would only encourage them. "I should get back to the shop." Tank stepped sideways, blocking her path. "We're not done talking." That's when Captain Bill appeared, walking down the dock with measured steps. The old fisherman might have been 70, but he moved with the confidence of someone who'd weathered worse storms than this. "Morning, Tank," he said casually, though Maya noticed his hand rested on the gutting knife at his belt. "These boys bothering my tenant?" "Your tenant?" Tank's voice dripped with disgust. "Bill, what the hell are you thinking? You know what happens to property values when—" "When what?" Bill interrupted, his voice sharp as broken glass. "When I rent to a law-abiding citizen who pays on time and helps with my paperwork, that kind of property value." The tension stretched taut between them. Tank's hands clenched into fists, leather gloves creaking. Several tourists had stopped to stare, phones already out, and Maya realized that was probably the only thing preventing violence. Even the storm riders knew better than to start something on camera. "This ain't over," Tank said finally, jabbing a finger at Maya. "You might have fooled this old man, but we know what you really are. This is our town. We've kept it clean for 40 years, and we're not stopping now." They roared off in a cloud of exhaust, leaving Maya's hands shaking so badly she dropped her papers. Bill helped her collect them, his weathered face grim. "I'm sorry about that," he said. "Tank's daddy was the same way. Mean as a snake and twice as stupid. Thought I'd seen the last of that nonsense when the old man died. But hate's like a weed. keeps growing back unless you pull it out by the roots. That evening, Rosa insisted Maya join them for dinner. Over fresh grouper and key lime pie, they told her stories about the marina's history, how Bill's father had built it after World War II, how they'd weathered hurricanes and economic downturns, how the community had slowly changed over the decades. But they carefully avoided mentioning the storm riders again, as if speaking their name might summon them. Maya barely slept that night. Every motorcycle engine in the distance made her heart race. She'd faced down hostile judges and aggressive opposing counsel. But this was different. The law couldn't protect her from men who saw her very existence as a threat. She found herself checking the locks repeatedly, placing a chair under the doorknob like her grandmother had taught her. The third morning dawned clear and calm, the kind of perfect Florida day that belonged on postcards. Maya decided to walk to the far end of the marina, past the commercial fishing boats, to where a small beach met the dock. If the storm riders came back, at least she'd see them coming. She'd just settled onto a bench with her coffee when she noticed something wrong. A section of dock railing had been removed. The exact spot where she'd been sitting yesterday, yellow caution tape fluttered in the breeze. But it was poorly secured, almost like someone wanted it to look official while leaving the danger exposed. The water below was deeper here, darker, where the channel had been dredged for larger boats. And that's when she saw the fins. 3 of them, maybe 4, circling in the shadows beneath the dock. Bull sharks, someone had mentioned, aggressive predators that hunted these waters, drawn by fishermen cleaning their catch. They could smell blood in the water from miles away. Maya stood to leave, unease prickling her spine. That's when she heard the motorcycles again, closer than ever. But this time they weren't coming down the main road. They were already here, engines off, walking their bikes quietly onto the dock. Tank led the group, a savage grin spreading across his face when he saw her trapped at the far end. "Morning, counselor," he called out, his voice carrying a promise of violence. "Funny thing about accidents on the dock, happens all the time. People slip, fall in. Tragic, really, especially in shark season." Maya's mind raced through her options like a prosecutor analyzing evidence. 8 men, 1 blocked exit, sharks below. Her phone was in her bag, too far away to reach. No witnesses this early, no cameras on this remote section of dock. Tank had planned this perfectly, made it look like an accident waiting to happen. "You don't want to do this," she said, forcing her voice to stay steady. "People know where I am." "Captain Bill is old and slow," Tank interrupted, moving closer. "By the time anyone notices you're missing, the tide will have carried you out to sea. Sharks don't leave much evidence." The other bikers spread out, forming a tightening noose. One of them, younger than the rest, with nervous eyes, hung back slightly. Maya focused on him, searching for a crack in their unity. "You want to be an accessory to murder? That's 25 to life in Florida." The young biker shifted uncomfortably, but Tank laughed. "Murder? We're just here enjoying the morning. If someone's clumsy enough to fall through a broken railing, well, that's what they call an act of God." Maya backed up until her heels touched the edge where the railing was missing. The sharks seemed to sense the disturbance above, their circles tightening. One of them, massive, probably 12 feet long, rolled slightly, and she glimpsed its dead black eye fixed on her. "Last chance," Tank said softly. "You leave town today, right now, and this all goes away. Take your car, your legal papers, your high and mighty attitude, and get out otherwise." "Otherwise what?" The voice came from behind the bikers, deep and commanding. They turned to see a man standing at the dock entrance. Tall, built like a linebacker, wearing a wetsuit unzipped to his waist. Maya had seen him around the marina, always heading out early with diving equipment. Marcus, she remembered. Captain Bill had mentioned he was former military, ran a dive charter business. "Mind your business, Marcus," Tank growled. "This doesn't concern you." Marcus walked forward with the easy confidence of someone who'd faced down worse than backwoods bikers. "See, that's where you're wrong. Everything that happens on this dock concerns me, especially when it involves 8 grown men cornering a woman." "She's trespassing," one of the bikers said weakly. "On a public dock? Try again." Marcus positioned himself between Maya and the bikers, subtle but protective. Now you boys want to explain why that safety railing's been tampered with? Tank's face flushed red. You taking her side? You know what that makes you? Someone who isn't a coward? Marcus suggested. Because from where I'm standing, it takes 8 of you to threaten one woman. That about right? The tension crackled like electricity before a lightning strike. Maya saw Tank's hand move toward his waistband, where something metallic glinted. Time slowed to a crawl. Gun! Marcus shouted, shoving Maya hard to the side. She stumbled, her foot catching on a rope. For a moment, she teetered on the edge, arms windmilling, and then gravity won. The water hit like concrete, driving all thought from her mind except survival. She plunged deep, the cold shocking her system. Opening her eyes in the murky green, she saw shadows moving. Fast, purposeful. A bull shark swept past, close enough that its rough skin scraped her arm. Blood! She was bleeding, and blood in the water meant. She kicked frantically toward the surface, lungs burning. Her head broke through, just as another fin sliced toward her. On the dock above, she could hear shouting. Fighting Marcus had engaged the bikers, but she couldn't focus on that because a massive shark was coming straight at her, mouth beginning to open, rows of teeth visible even in the dim light. This was it. This was how Maya Thompson died, not fighting for justice in a courtroom, but as prey in foreign waters. The shark's mouth opened wider, and she could see straight down its gullet, could smell the rank odor of dead fish and decay. Then something impossible happened. A bottlenose dolphin slammed into the shark's side with the force of a torpedo. Then another, and another. The water erupted in chaos as an entire pod of dolphins surrounded Maya, placing themselves between her and the sharks. They moved in perfect coordination, taking turns ramming the predators, their powerful tails creating a protective barrier. Maya treaded water in the center of this aquatic ballet, too stunned to fully process what was happening. These were the same dolphins she'd watched playing in the sunrise. She recognized the distinctive scar on one's dorsal fin, the smaller juvenile that always swam beside its mother. They circled her with military precision, chattering and whistling, driving the frustrated sharks back into deeper water. Grab the rope! Marcus's voice cut through her shock. A lifeline splashed down beside her. Maya grabbed it with both hands, and strong arms hauled her up. She collapsed on the dock, coughing up seawater, as the dolphins maintained their protective circle below. The scene on the dock was chaos. 2 bikers were on the ground, nursing injuries. The others stood in a wary cluster, Tank at their center with a bloody nose. But what made them all freeze wasn't Marcus or the fight. It was the crowd that had materialized as if from nowhere. 20 people, maybe 30, all holding phones, all recording. Tourists from the nearby hotels, early morning joggers, fishermen who'd heard the commotion. And at the front of the crowd stood Captain Bill with a shotgun, flanked by a dozen local boat captains Maya recognized from the marina. Got every second of it, a woman called out, waving her phone. The tampering with the rail, the threats, the assault, already uploaded to the cloud. Tank's face cycled through emotions. Rage, fear, calculation. He'd planned for no witnesses, but now he was surrounded by them. And worse, from his perspective, some of those witnesses were people he knew. People from the community who were looking at him not with respect or fear, but with disgust. They attacked me, Maya said, her voice hoarse but clear. They removed the safety railing and tried to push me in with the sharks. This man saved my life. She gestured to Marcus, who stood protectively beside her. That's a lie, Tank sputtered. We never touched her. She fell on her own. Really? An elderly woman Maya recognized from the bait shop stepped forward. Because I've been watching from my balcony since you boys showed up. Saw you messing with that railing yesterday evening, too. Been wondering when someone was going to do something about you thugs terrorizing decent people. The police arrived within minutes. Someone had called them the moment the confrontation began. But what struck Maya wasn't the officers taking statements or Tank being handcuffed. His face a mask of impotent rage. It was the dolphins. They remained in the water below, circling, as if standing guard until they were certain she was safe. Only when the EMTs had checked her over and wrapped a blanket around her shoulders did the pod finally slip away into the deeper waters, their dorsal fins catching the morning sun one last time. "23 years I've been diving these waters," Marcus said quietly, sitting beside her on a bench while chaos swirled around them. "I've never seen anything like that dolphins protecting a human from sharks. It's not unheard of. But the way they responded, like they knew you." He shook his head in wonder. Maya touched the small gold cross at her throat, the one her grandmother had given her the day she graduated law school. "The Lord works in mysterious ways, baby girl," her grandmother had said. "Sometimes he sends angels with wings, sometimes with fins." "Ma'am," a female officer approached, notebook in hand. "I'm Detective Sarah Chen. I need to take your statement, but first, are you sure you don't want to go to the hospital?" "I'm okay," Maya said, though her hands still trembled. "Just some scratches." Detective Chen's expression was grim. "This isn't the first complaint we've had about the storm riders. They've been careful, usually stopping just short of anything we could prosecute. But this," she gestured to the damaged railing, the crowd of witnesses. "This is attempted murder." As Maya gave her statement, more truth emerged. The young biker who'd hung back, his name was Jamie, suddenly broke from the group. "I can't do this anymore," he said, his voice cracking. "They made me help with the railing, said it was just to scare her. I didn't know about the sharks, I swear. Tank's been planning this for days, ever since he found out she was a civil rights lawyer." "Shut your mouth," Tank roared, lunging against the officers holding him. "You oath-breaking little—" "The oath I took was to brotherhood," Jamie shot back, finding courage in his confession. "Not to murder, not to this." He turned to Detective Chen. "I'll testify. I'll tell you everything. The other people they've run out of town, the businesses they've threatened, all of it." The dominoes began to fall. Another biker, seeing the writing on the wall, started talking. Then another. Within an hour, decades of intimidation and hate came pouring out like pus from an infected wound. The Storm Riders hadn't just been a motorcycle club. They'd been a cancer on the community, using fear to maintain their vision of what the Keys should be. But what moved Maya most wasn't the arrests or the confessions. It was the community response. Rosa arrived with a thermos of hot coffee and fresh clothes. Fishermen she'd never met formed a protective circle around her, sharing stories of their own encounters with the Storm Riders. The woman who'd been filming revealed she was a civil rights attorney from Miami, vacationing with her family. "I'll help with the prosecution," she offered. "Pro bono. It's time someone stood up to these thugs." As the police led Tank away, he turned back one last time. The hate in his eyes had dimmed to something else. Bewilderment, perhaps. The world he'd built on intimidation and racial superiority had crumbled in minutes, brought down not by violence, but by ordinary people choosing courage over fear. Captain Bill approached Maya as the crowd began to disperse. The old fisherman's eyes were wet with unshed tears. "I should have done more," he said roughly. "All these years, I kept my head down, told myself it wasn't my fight, but evil grows when good people do nothing. My daddy knew that, fought in World War II against folks who thought like Tank. Somewhere along the way, I forgot." "You stood up when it mattered," Maya said gently. "No," Bill shook his head. "Marcus stood up. Those folks with cameras stood up. Even those dolphins stood up. You stood up just by being here, refusing to be run off." He squared his shoulders. "But I'll stand up now. Whatever you need for the case, witnesses, documents, anything, you got it." The sun had climbed high overhead, turning the water into a dazzling expanse of blue and gold. Where hours before there had been circling sharks and violence, now there were only gentle waves and wheeling seabirds. The marina looked exactly the same, but Maya knew everything had changed. Marcus walked her back to the bait shop, his presence reassuring after the morning's terror. "You planning to stay?" he asked carefully. "No one would blame you if you left." "What happened today? That's not who we are, but I understand if you can't see past it." Maya looked out at the water where the dolphins had saved her life. She thought about her grandmother, who'd faced down worse than the Storm Riders just to vote, just to send her children to integrated schools. She thought about all the small towns across America where people like Tank held sway through fear, where good people kept their heads down and told themselves it wasn't their fight. "They wanted me to run," she said finally, "to prove that I didn't belong here. But you know what? This is exactly where I belong. This community needs lawyers who'll stand up for what's right, who'll help people navigate the system. And after today, she smiled, and it felt like the sun coming out after a storm. After today, I think I've got a lot of friends who'll stand with me. Marcus grinned, the expression transforming his serious face. Count me as one of them. And hey, if you ever want to learn to dive, see those dolphins up close in their world instead of yours. First lessons on me. You might regret that offer, Maya warned. My grandmother always said I was stubborn as a mule once I set my mind to something. Something tells me that's exactly what this town needs. As they reached the bait shop, Maya saw something that made her stop and wonder. The dolphins had returned, a line of them just beyond the marina, their sleek bodies rising and falling in perfect synchronization. They seemed to be looking at her, and the largest one, the one with the scarred fin who'd struck the shark first, raised its head from the water in what looked almost like a salute. "Thank you," Maya whispered, not caring if it was silly to talk to dolphins. After everything that had happened, silly was relative. The trial of the storm riders became a watershed moment for the Florida Keys. Maya threw herself into the prosecution with the same fierce determination that had carried her through law school. But this time, she wasn't alone. The community that had once stayed silent rallied behind her, providing testimony, evidence, and support that painted a damning picture of decades of harassment. Tank received 25 years for attempted murder. The others got varying sentences for conspiracy and hate crimes. Jamie, who had turned state's evidence, received probation and community service. Maya personally advocated for him, seeing a young man who'd been caught up in something bigger than himself and had found the courage to break free. But the real victory wasn't in the courtroom. It was in what happened to the town afterward. 3 months after the incident, Maya stood on the same dock, but everything felt different. The new safety railings were sturdy and bright, installed by a volunteer crew of local contractors. A small plaque read, "In honor of those who stand up to hate." Children of all colors played on the beach nearby while their parents chatted over Cuban coffee from the new cafe that had opened in a formerly abandoned storefront. "You ready for this?" Marcus asked, adjusting her diving mask. Today was her 15th lesson, and he'd promised something special. They descended into the clear water, and Maya's breath caught behind her regulator. The underwater world that had once terrified her now felt like coming home. Schools of yellowtail snapper parted before them like living curtains. A sea turtle glided past, ancient and serene. And then, as if summoned by her presence, the dolphins appeared. The same pod that had saved her life surrounded them in the water, their intelligent eyes studying her through her mask. The matriarch with the scarred fin approached slowly, and Maya held perfectly still, barely breathing. The dolphin circled once, twice, then gently bumped Maya's outstretched hand with her rostrum. A dolphin's kiss of acceptance. What happened next left even Marcus speechless. The juvenile dolphin, playful and bold, swam directly to Maya carrying something in its mouth. It was a piece of coral, worn smooth by the currents, shaped almost like a heart. The young dolphin released it into Maya's hands, chirping excitedly before spinning away his mask as they surfaced. "In all my years diving, I've never... They brought you a gift. Dolphins don't do that. They just don't." But Maya understood. The dolphins had recognized something in her that morning. Not just a person in distress, but someone fighting against the same darkness that poisoned their waters with hate and indifference. They had stood up for her, and now they welcomed her into their world as family. That evening, the marina hosted its first official community gathering. What had started as Rosa's idea for a small barbecue had grown into something bigger. Families who'd been too intimidated to mingle before now shared tables. Stories were told, connections made, walls torn down, one conversation at a time. Maya sat with Captain Bill and Rosa, watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible shades of orange and purple. The old captain had become like a father to her, gruff but kind, always ready with advice or a fishing story that somehow contained exactly the wisdom she needed. "My daddy used to say the ocean remembers," Bill mused, watching the waves. "Every act of kindness, every moment of courage, it all goes into the water and comes back multiplied. Maybe that's why those dolphins saved you. The ocean remembered all the good you'd done and sent its guardians. Before Maya could respond, a commotion near the dock caught their attention. A young black family stood uncertainly at the edge of the gathering, tourists from their cameras and resort wear. The father held a little girl who couldn't have been more than 6, her hair in pigtails, eyes wide with wonder at all the boats. Maya watched as the community she'd come to love faced its test. For a moment, old habits and prejudices seemed to hover in the air like storm clouds. Then Mrs. Chen, the detective's mother who ran the bait shop cash register, stood up with a warm smile. "Come on over. We've got plenty of food. Your little one like fish? We've got the best grouper in the Keys." The floodgates opened. People made room at tables, shared stories, offered boat rides. The little girl ended up on Marcus's shoulders, squealing with delight as he pointed out where dolphins sometimes played. Her parents relaxed, tension draining from their shoulders as they realized they'd found not just tolerance, but genuine welcome. As the stars emerged overhead, Rosa clinked a spoon against her glass. The crowd quieted, turning toward her. "6 months ago, our marina was dying," she said, her voice carrying across the water. Not from storms or bad fishing, but from something worse, fear and hate that kept good people apart. Then Maya came, and she didn't just refuse to be run off. She showed us who we could be. "But it wasn't just me," Maya protested, standing up. "It was all of you. Marcus, who risked his life. Captain Bill, who stood up with his shotgun. Every person who filmed, who testified, who chose courage." She paused, emotion thickening her voice. "And those dolphins who reminded us that protecting each other isn't just a human duty. It's nature's way." She held up the piece of coral the juvenile dolphin had given her, now polished and set on a simple chain around her neck. "My grandmother used to say that God sends us signs when we're on the right path. I think he sent me here, not just to find a new home, but to help all of us remember what community really means." Captain Bill raised his beer. "To Maya, who faced down sharks, both the finned kind and the ones on motorcycles. To the dolphins," someone else called out, "the real heroes. To all of us," Maya said softly, "to a community that chooses love over hate, courage over fear, every single day." As the celebration continued around her, Maya walked to the dock's edge and looked out at the dark water. Phosphorescence glowed in the waves, nature's light show, painting trails of green fire with each small disturbance. In the distance, a dolphin breached, its body silhouetted against the moon for a perfect moment before splashing back into its element. She thought about the twisting path that had brought her here, the frustration in Chicago, her grandmother's inheritance, the terrifying moment when she'd fallen into shark-filled waters. Every step had led to this, a community transformed, bonds forged in crisis, and a purpose clearer than any she'd found in corporate law. Tomorrow she'd open her new practice, Thompson and Associates, Maritime and Civil Rights Law. The associates were optimistic, but 3 young lawyers from Miami had already reached out, inspired by the trial coverage the storm riders had wanted to preserve their warped vision of the past. Instead, they'd helped create a future where kids of all colors could play on these docks without fear. A warm hand touched her shoulder. Marcus stood beside her, comfortable in shared silence. They watched the water together, and Maya could have sworn she saw familiar fins cutting through the phosphorescence, the pod making their nightly rounds. "No regrets about leaving Chicago?" Marcus asked finally. Maya touched the coral pendant at her throat and smiled. "You know what? I wasn't pushed into those waters. I was baptized in them. And when I came up, I was exactly where I needed to be." If this story touched your heart, if you believe in communities standing together against hate, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to Acts of Depth for more true stories of human courage and unexpected grace, because sometimes the most powerful moments come from the darkest waters, and sometimes our guardian angels have fins instead of wings.